to our new video, and in today's video I'll be discussing about the tabular list. I mean the ICD-10-CM tabular list. So guys, if you haven't watched the video first, the first video that I have where I discussed about the ICD-10-CM alphabetic index and conventions, please watch that video first before watching this video. So stay tuned. I'll be discussing the tabular list. Okay, so guys, your tabular list is composed, this is the format and the structure of your ICD-10-CM codes. As you can see, there are 7 characters there. So you have your first is your alpha. The first character most of the time in your ICD-10-CM codes, or all ICD-10-CM code sets starts with a letter. Okay, so you have your alphabets from A to Z except for letter U, and you followed by a number and a third character, which is also a number, and right after the third character you have your period or your dot. So this is the format most of the time. After the 3 characters, it's always followed by a dot, and it's followed by your 4, 5, 6, or even 7 characters. So your code is usually 3 to 7 characters. Okay, and they are the 2 always alphanumeric, while 3 to 7 is usually numeric or alpha. Okay, so in the discussion of your format and your structure, as you can see here, the first 3, you have an arrow here. This is the category. You have your 4, 5, and even your 6 is also known as the theology, anatomy, site, or the severity. These additional characters are usually used to further specify. To further specify the type or the theology, the anatomic part involved, or the site or the severity of a certain conditions. And you may also see 6 and 7, or they are also known as your additional characters. You have your added code extension or your 7th character code. So keep in mind that codes can be 3 digits, 4 characters, 3 characters, 4 characters, 5 characters, 6 characters, or even 7 characters. Guys, your guideline tells you that the ICD-10-CM tabular list contains of categories, subcategories, and codes. Okay, so as you can see a while ago, when we go through the actual format, the first 3 digit or 3 characters is also known as your category, and the additional 4, 5 characters are also known as your subcategories. So let's move on first. Let's start first with your categories, followed by subcategories and codes. So these 7 characters are grouped into 3. Your first 3 characters is also known as your category. Your 4, 5, and even your 6 is also known as your subcategories. And your 7 is your code or your valid code. But I'm not saying that all codes should always be a 7 characters. A code can be valid even if it's only a 3 characters. A code can be valid even if it's a 4 characters. A code can be valid if it's only a 5 or 6 characters, as long as you are coding it to the highest level of your specificity. So I've been mentioning about highest level of specificity. That is based on your guideline, as we discussed later on. So guys, your categories, characters for categories, subcategories, and codes may either be a letter or a number, and all categories are always 3 characters. So we go to the discussion, when I mention category, that is the 3 characters. When I mention subcategories, that should be the 4, 5, or 6, or valid code can be a 4, 5, 6, or 7 as well. A 3-character category that has no further subdivision is equivalent to a code, meaning if there are no additional available character for that certain category, you are allowed to use that 3-character codes, because a code can be a 3-character only. A valid code can be 4, as I discussed a while ago, 5, 6, or even 7 character. As long as you are coding to that highest level of specificity, you are good to use that code. It is valid. Okay, as long as, guys, you are following this guideline. So before moving on to that specific guideline of coding to the highest level of specificity, let's discuss first about your subcategories. Your subcategories, or your 4th and your 5th character, as we discussed a while ago, that this may further specify the anatomy, the etiology, the site, or even the severity of a certain condition. So these 4th and 5th characters are very important, especially if the documentation is specific. Okay, so you always need to code it to the highest level of specificity. And next one is the code. The final level of subdivision is the code, or also known as the highest level of specificity. So codes that have 7 characters are still referred to as codes and not subcategories. And a code that has an applicable 7th character is considered invalid without the 7th character. So guys, since we've been mentioning about 7th character already, as we move on to the next slide, we will be discussing about the 7th character. But guys, not all codes require 7 characters, but there are certain codes that require 7th character. So how would you know it that that code or that category or that subcategory requires a 7th character? There is an instructional note right below that category or subcategory that you need to have a 7 characters. So your 7 characters is always a letter. It's alpha. Okay, so before moving on to your 7th character, I just want to highlight this reporting purposes, or the guideline that been mentioning a while ago. For reporting purposes, only codes are permissible, meaning you only need to report a valid code, and a valid code is the end, or if there's no additional character that may be used, meaning you end up using the highest level of specificity, not categories or subcategories. If you're only coding it up to the subcategories, that is considered invalid. So you need to go through the highest level of specificity. So to simplify, a 4-digit code exists. If the 4-digit code exists, do not report the 3-digit. If there's a 5 code digit exists, do not report the 4th. If you have your 6 code exists, do not report the 5th-digit code. If you have your 7 code exists, do not report your 6-digit code. To simplify again, you always need to code to the highest level of specificity. When you have your book, you can always go to the indentation, and if it's already the last indentation, that is already the highest level of specificity, unless it requires a 7th character. Okay, you can visit any websites if you don't have your book yet. You have your ICD-10-CM websites. You can find it anywhere in your internet. Okay, you also have your placeholder X. Your placeholder X is from the keyword placeholder. They are just a temporary placeholder there that we maybe use them in order to put the 7th character and the 7th character data field. Now, this is also used for future expansion. The common example here is you have your poisoning, adverse effect, and underdosing codes categories. You have your T36 and your T50. You can go ahead and check T36. Sometimes it only requires the codes available. There's only 4 digits, 5 characters rather, 4 characters, 5 characters, and all codes under T36 up to T50 always requires a 7th character. So if you only have 4 characters And you need to put in the seventh character always on the seventh character data field. You need to put in a temporary X there to make sure that that seventh character should always be on the seventh place. That's the purpose of your X. Okay? Where placeholder exists, the X must be used in order to code to be considered valid. Because guys, when the category or the subcategory requires 7 characters and you put it the 7th character on the 6th place, that is considered invalid. So what if there's no available characters, sir? See, that's the purpose of your X. You need to put in the X in order to make sure that the 7th character should always be on the 7th data field. Okay, so since we're discussing about 7 characters are required for all codes within the category as the notes in the tabular list instruct. So the 7 characters I mentioned, it should always be on the 7th character data field. Now, if you only have 4 or 5 characters available and you need to report a 7th character always, you need to put in your placeholder X. So some common examples, you have your A, V, and S. These are common examples of your 7 characters. You can go ahead and check your T36. Okay, there's a 7 characters there. You have your A, you have your D, and you have your S. Your 7 characters, you can always see them right after or right below your category. So when we say category, below your 3 character code. So you have your A for initial encounter, V for subsequent encounter, and S for your sequela. So for this definition of your 7th character, I will further discuss this as we go through the chapter specific guidelines. So here are just common examples. There are still additional 7 characters that we may use as we discuss your chapter specific guideline. Next, you have your abbreviations. Your abbreviations that you can see usually in the alphabetic index and the tabular list. When we say abbreviations, you have your example, you have an NEC, and you have a NOS. You also have that NEC and NOS in your tabular list. Your NEC is also known as not elsewhere classifiable, meaning the abbreviation in the alphabetic index represents other specified. What do you mean by that? Common example here, guys, is what if the doctor documents a specific condition. The doctor documents a detailed type of illness or the detailed type of diagnosis. Unfortunately, that specific conditions or that detailed diagnosis that the provider notes is not yet available in our code book. Okay, so if you don't have that yet, you may end up using other specifieds. Okay, so your key here is there's a detail that this is the type of the diagnosis. Unfortunately, there's no available code for that certain specific condition yet. So you may end up using other specified. Same thing with NOS, while NOS rather, your NOS is not otherwise specified. Your NOS or not otherwise specified is also known as your unspecified, meaning most of the time, common cases that you may encounter or you may end up using unspecified is like, for example, the provider documents. It's more on documentation issues. Like, for example, the provider documents only pneumonia. And keep in mind that there are different causes of pneumonia. So, just in case the doctor doesn't specify, if you may query, you may, if the physician is just like beside you. But guys, if there's no chance for you to query right away the provider, you may end up using unspecified. Okay, it's also known as your not otherwise specified. So they have the same definition in your tabular and in your alphabetics index. Okay, let's move on to your punctuation, your brackets. Keep in mind, please highlight your guidelines. Brackets they have 2 different uses in your both in your tabular and in your alphabetic index. For your tabular list, The main purpose is to enclose synonyms, alternative wordings, and explanatory phrases, while in your alphabetic index, it is used to identify manifestation codes. So they have two different purposes. So keep in mind, if the question is asking about the tabular list, that's for synonyms. But if they're asking about the alphabetic index, that should be to identify manifestation codes. Next one, you have your close and open parentheses. Your close and open parentheses is commonly used in your alphabetics in tabular list. They have the same use. So you have just highlight your guideline. The purpose of your words under that parenthesis or enclosed with the parenthesis is also known as your supplementary words, or these may represent statements of the procedure without affecting the code number to which it is assigned. Common example, please go ahead and check your I-10. And there are certain codes there, certain terms there like malignant hypertension, benign hypertension, arterial hypertension, like that. When you go through that I-10 code, just enclose with your parentheses. Colons are used in the tabular list after an incomplete term. So it's used in your tabular list. Okay? Next one, you have your other and unspecified codes. So since we discussed about NEC, it's also known as your others. These are information in the medical record provides detail for which a specific code does not exist. So I mentioned a while ago that there's a specific condition provided by the doctor or provided by your healthcare provider. Unfortunately, there's no available code yet for that condition. So you may end up using others specified, and it is also known as your NEC. And you have your unspecified, meaning you have your also known as your NOS, meaning it's more on documentation issue. The medical record is insufficient to assign more specific conditions. Okay, so as much as possible, we need to be very specific with the documentations. But if the problem is the documentation itself, you may end up using unspecified. Okay. Next, you have your includes notes. Your includes notes, you can always see them right after the 3 character or right below your category. Okay, guys, keep in mind, please always read those includes notes right after your category, because that is very important, or that notes may be applicable to all codes right below your category. Common example is when you go to your I-10, go at the top, you can see an includes notes there, that instruction there, that you need to always use an additional code for this, like that. Okay, so don't fail to read those includes notes. You may also see inclusion terms. List of terms is included under some codes. These terms are conditions wherein the code is to be used, or these are additional terms or additional words or synonyms that you may use, or you may further specify, or just to specify what type of conditions, or these terms are oftenly used by other providers, but they still have the same meaning. So you can still use the same code. You can still use the same code, even if there are different terms, as long as they are synonyms and they're talking about the same conditions. That is that you can still use that same code. Okay. Your excludes note, when I say includes term, these are included in the code itself, while excludes notes, obviously this is not included in the code. And your excludes notes has, each type of note has a different definition. For use both, they are similar in that they indicate that codes exclude from each other, or independent to each other. So meaning, when you see a code below, and it's just below the excludes notes, meaning these codes are excluded to that code, or it's independent to that code. So when you go to your I-10 and go to excludes notes, I think you may see there 010 or 010, 0010. Okay, so they are excluded, meaning they are independent, or they cannot be coded together. Okay, or it depends. As we go to the discussion about the two types of your excludes. Excludes 1 meaning a type 1 exclude nodes is purely excludes nodes, or they can never be coded together. So common example here like is if you have your congenital versus your acquired. Like for example, the patient has a congenital heart disease and the patient may also have acquired, the other patient, the conditions also acquired heart disease. They cannot be coded together because they are two independent conditions. Okay, but it cannot be happen at the same time. Like for example, acquire congenital valvular or congenital heart defects, and it's the patient, and it's also that conditions may also be acquired conditions. So they cannot, but the two conditions cannot occur together. Okay, there's no possibility that that condition occur together. So meaning you cannot code them together always. Okay, you cannot code them together. That's the definition of excludes 1, meaning they cannot happen together or they cannot occur together, so you cannot code them together. So my keyword here in excludes 1 is never coded together. Okay, your excludes 2 is there is a chance that you may code them together as long as that conditions is available, or that condition happened at the same time. So when an excludes 2 node appears under a code, it is acceptable to use both the code and the excluded code together when appropriate. Okay? So as long as that two conditions are present, you can code them together. Common example here is your acute tonsillitis and your chronic tonsillitis. If both conditions are available and it's documented in the medical records that both conditions are present and it is under that excludes 2, you may code them together as long as that conditions are both present. Okay? So your excludes 1, they can never be coded together. Excludes 2, may be reported together. Okay? Next one, you have your etiology and manifestations. So this guideline is just telling you that there are conditions that it's due to a certain conditions also, or there's an etiology, and sometimes if there's an etiology, there's also a manifestation. Like for example, you have your diabetes due to pancreatic cancer, or any conditions like you may have your retinopathy due to diabetes, like that, or your instructional notes. Certain conditions have both an underlying etiology and multiple body system manifestations due to underlying etiology. So for such conditions, the ICD-10-CM has a code convention that requires the underlying conditions to be sequenced first. So meaning you need to have two codes. And most of the time, the underlying etiology or the underlying condition should be sequenced first or should be coded first. When such combination code exists, you may also use additional code, note etiology code, or code first, or note at the manifestation code. Meaning, there are certain conditions that you need to specify the type of manifestation. So the instructional note will always tell you to use an additional code. If the instructional notes tells you that you need to have an additional code, you need to use an additional code. Okay, and that additional code should be a secondary. So the instructional notes indicate the proper sequencing order at the codes, etiology followed by manifestation. So guys, when you see like conditions that there's an etiology, Okay, so you always need to code etiology if the instructional notes tell you to code etiology. So it requires two codes. So most of the time, if you see instructional notes that you need to code first, you need to code that first. And if you have an instructional note to use an additional code, so you are required to use that an additional code. Because remember, your coding is not complete without using an additional code, or if you are not coding that code first instruction. Okay? The use of and, your word and should be interpreted to mean either and or. So meaning, it's either and or, that is still considered the same. In your ICD-10 definition, and or is the same thing. So common example, like for example, a patient has tuberculosis of bones. The patients also suffered tuberculosis of the joints. And a tuberculosis of the bones and joints are classified as A18.0, tuberculosis of bones and joints. Meaning in this guideline, like for example, the doctor documents tuberculosis of bones only. Can you use A18.0? Yes. What if the documentation is tuberculosis of the joints only? Can you use A18.0? Yes. Because remember, the definition of and is also known as or in your ICD-10-CM. So don't be confused, guys. And or is the same thing in your ICD-10-CM. With, the word with or in should be interpreted meaning associated with or due to. Like hypertension with kidney disease, hypertension with heart disease. Meaning you can assume or you can associate or you can tell it that it's due to. That heart disease is due to that hypertension, or your kidney disease is due to that hypertension. Or when it appears in a code title in the alphabetic index, either main term or subterm, or the instructional code note in the tabular list exists. Guys, when you see these words with or in, you can always presume a causal relationship between the two conditions linked by these terms, even if there's no documentation at all. I mean, even if there's no specific documentation by the doctor linking them together, because your instructional notes, your instruction is you can always presume a causal relationship as per your index or as per your terms. Like below your terms, you have the word with. As long as those terms are below the with or below the in. Okay, you can go ahead and check hypertension. And when you go to hypertension, you can see with, and under the word with, you can see subterms there. So any subterms or any conditions after that with is, you can assume a causal relationship. Okay? C and C also, if your instruction requires you to see other terms or see also other terms, guys, don't forget to follow those notes. This is just the instruct code. Also, if your code book or your alphabetic index or your tabular list tell you that you also need to code also this code, you are required to code that code. But your sequencing will always depend on the circumstances of encounter. But you are obliged, you are required to code that code also. Because if you forget or you fail to code that code also, your code is incomplete. Okay, remember when we are putting in code, our goal is to be specific and to be complete as much as possible. Okay? The default codes, I discussed this in our alphabetic index discussion. That is, default codes are those codes right after or code listed right after those terms. When you go to your diarrhea, when you go to your pneumonia, if there are code available there, those are your default codes. Okay? code assignment and clinical criteria, the assignment of diagnosis code is always based on the provider's diagnostic statement that the condition exists. Even if you don't see that in the laboratory result, even if you don't see that in your radiology report, but if the doctor documents conditions like that, that statement of the doctor is already enough. I mean, your coding is always based on the provider's diagnostic statements, and the provider's statement that the patient has a particular condition is sufficient. Code assignment is not based on that clinical criteria used by the provider to establish by the diagnosis. So the finale or the always basis of our documentation should be your provider's statement, and it should be supported also by the documentation. So that is our conventions and a part of the tabular list. And in our next discussions, I will be discussing the general coding guidelines. So guys, stay tuned. Keep watching my videos. So if you're new to my channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and please watch this video through our YouTube channel. Do not forget, though, please don't download this video and share with it others. Please share this link so that they will also watch this video, so that I'll continue uploading more videos and more discussions about the ICD-10 and the CPC exam prep. So good luck and enjoy watching my videos about your CPC exam prep. Thank you and God bless.